Here's something nobody talks about, honestly. When a woman goes a long time without intimacy, without real, felt, genuine physical and emotional closeness, something shifts in her. Not in the way most people assume, not the dramatic way movies show it, not the cliche she's desperate now trope that low quality advice channels love to repeat. Something quieter, something deeper. Something that most men, and honestly, most women themselves, misread entirely. And here's what's interesting about that misread. The men who understand what's actually happening during that period, they don't have to work harder. They don't have to say more. They don't have to perform. They just have to understand. And that understanding, that alone changes everything about how they show up and how she responds. Most people, when they think about a woman who hasn't been intimate in a long time, they think one of two things. Either they assume she's emotionally untouched by it, that she's fine, she's busy, she's moved on. Or they assume she's become emotionally raw and reactive, desperate for any attention she can get. Both of those reads are wrong. And if you're operating from either of those assumptions, you are leaving one of the most significant psychological dynamics in human connection completely invisible to you. This isn't about manipulation. It isn't about finding someone's weak spot and exploiting it. If that's what you came for, this is the wrong channel. What this is about is emotional intelligence. The kind that makes you a more present, more perceptive, more genuinely attractive human being. Not because you learned a technique, but because you actually understand people better. The psychology here is grounded in real research: neuroscience, attachment theory, somatic psychology, hormonal biology. This isn't my opinion. These are documented patterns in how the human nervous system responds to connection and to the absence of it. And I think it matters, because too many people walk into connections with another person, especially after she's been through a period of emotional and physical isolation, and they completely mismanage the moment. Not out of bad intent, out of ignorance. They push when they should hold still. They perform when they should be present. They misread her guardedness as disinterest, when actually it's something far more nuanced and far more workable than that. By the end of this video, you're going to understand 3 specific psychological shifts that happen in a woman after extended intimacy deprivation. You're going to understand why they happen, what they feel like from the inside, and most importantly, what the right kind of presence looks like in response to each one. Let's get into it. Before we get to the framework, I want to name the mistake, because I see it constantly. A man meets a woman. He senses, or maybe she tells him, that it's been a long time since she's been in a real relationship, since she's had real intimacy, real closeness. And what does he do with that information? Usually one of 2 things. Option 1, he uses it as leverage. He figures she must be eager, she must be ready, she's probably been waiting for exactly this, so he accelerates. He pushes for physical closeness quickly. He interprets her longing for connection as an invitation to skip the emotional work. He's wrong. Option 2, he overthinks it. He becomes overly cautious. He puts her on some kind of emotional pedestal, treats her like she's fragile, becomes performatively gentle in a way that feels inauthentic. She picks up on the performance almost immediately, and instead of feeling safe, she feels managed. He's also wrong. Here's what both of these men are missing. They're responding to a concept she hasn't been intimate in a long time, rather than responding to her, to the actual human being in front of them, who is carrying a very specific and complex set of emotional and physiological experiences that most people have never had articulated to them clearly. That gap between what she's actually experiencing and what he thinks she's experiencing is where most connections fail before they even have a chance to begin. And it's fixable, but only if you're willing to understand what's actually going on inside her first. Here's something that surprises most people when they first hear it. The human nervous system is adaptive, radically adaptive. When you go without something long enough, food, sunlight, social contact, physical touch, Your nervous system doesn't just sit there, suffering indefinitely. It reorganizes. It finds a new baseline. And this is what happens to a woman after an extended period without physical and emotional intimacy. Her nervous system, her baseline state of arousal, connection, and openness, has recalibrated to a world where intimacy is not present. Here's why that matters in practice. Oxytocin is sometimes called the bonding hormone. It's released through touch, eye contact, emotional warmth, and physical closeness. In an ongoing intimate relationship, a woman's nervous system is essentially bathed in a regular background level of this chemical. It becomes part of her homeostatic normal. When that's gone, not for a week, but for months or years, her system stops expecting it. And when the nervous system stops expecting something, it develops something psychologists call a defensive habituation. In plain language, she becomes less sensitive to the signals that would normally draw her toward connection, not because she doesn't want it, but because her system has learned, through repetition, that wanting it leads to a particular kind of quiet ache, and eventually the system learns to not fully register the wanting, because registering it without being able to fulfill it is just pain. This is not emotional damage. This is elegant biological self-protection. But here's the implication that most men completely miss. When you enter her life and you immediately try to accelerate connection, physical closeness, declarations of interest, intensity, you're essentially asking a nervous system that has downregulated its sensitivity to suddenly jump back to full output. That's not how nervous systems work. A thermostat that's been set to 60 degrees for 2 years doesn't immediately run full heat because you nudged the dial once. It takes time. It takes consistent, sustained warmth, not a sudden blast. The men who understand this don't rush the warmth. They become the warmth, steadily, patiently, without making their patience feel like a strategy. And what happens over time? Her nervous system begins to recalibrate again. Upward this time, toward openness, toward trust, toward desire. But it follows her timeline, not his. The man who can hold that space without urgency, without checking his watch, without making his consistency feel conditional, that man activates something in her that no fast mover ever could, because her nervous system can tell the difference between a spike and a steady flame. She may not consciously articulate that distinction, but her body knows it. Trigger 2. Touch hunger. Creates hypervigilance, not softness. Now, this is the one that surprises people most. Common logic says, a woman who hasn't had physical intimacy in a long time must be softer, more open, more welcoming of touch and closeness. The reality is often the exact opposite. Extended physical isolation, what researchers sometimes call skin hunger or touch deprivation, tends to increase a woman's hypervigilance around physical interaction, not decrease it. Here's why. The somatosensory system, the part of your nervous system that processes physical sensation and touch, doesn't just passively receive input. It's active, it's interpretive, and when it's been understimulated for a long time, it becomes sensitized. Think of it this way. If you've been in a very quiet room for hours, a normal conversation feels loud. Your ears haven't stopped working. They've become more attuned to stimulus because there's been so little of it. The same thing happens with touch. A woman who has experienced extended physical isolation becomes more, not less sensitive to the nature of physical contact. Every touch carries more weight. Every brush of a hand, every close physical proximity, every small gesture of warmth, her system reads it with amplified intensity, which means the wrong kind of touch at the wrong time doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels violating in a way that's disproportionate to the actual event. And the right kind of touch, slow, intentional, non-demanding, doesn't just feel good. It feels overwhelming in the best sense. Deeply felt. Deeply meaningful. This is why hypervigilance develops. Not because she's broken or damaged, but because her system is protecting this heightened sensitivity. It's essentially standing guard over something that has become very precious precisely because it's been absent. She becomes more discerning about who gets to be physically close to her, not less. She becomes more attuned to how you touch, whether it's claiming or giving, whether it's rushed or present, whether it communicates desire for her or desire for release. She can feel the difference, even when she can't name it. Now, what does this mean for how you show up? It means your physicality needs to speak a different language than what most men default to. Most men think about physical escalation as a ladder. You start at the bottom, a handshake, a casual touch, and you climb, step by step, toward intimacy. But that metaphor implies urgency, a destination you're moving toward. The more accurate metaphor here is resonance. You're not climbing toward her, you're tuning to her, matching her frequency, which means some days that frequency is open and warm and receptive, and other days it's quieter, more internal. And the man who can read that shift and honor it without making it a problem, that man becomes the safest physical presence she's ever experienced. Safety, in the somatic sense, is not the absence of tension, it's the presence of attunement. And attunement is attractive, not in the surface performative way, in the deep cellular way, the way that makes her think about you when you're not there. Trigger 3. The identity has quietly rebuilt itself, and this changes everything. Here is the one that almost nobody talks about, and I think it's the most important thing you can understand about a woman who has spent a significant period of time outside of intimate partnership. During that period while she was going without, she didn't just wait, she built. Human beings do not remain static in the absence of relationship. The self doesn't pause and cue politely for someone to come along and activate it again. The self reorganizes around its own center. A woman who has been without intimacy for a year, 2 years, 3 years, she has developed a very particular relationship with herself. She's found her routines. She's learned what brings her peace. She's become deeply acquainted with her own solitude, what it feels like, what it asks of her, what it quietly offers. She has a sense of her own space, her own time, her own emotional rhythms. And here's the part that most men catastrophically misread. When she enters a potential connection with someone new, she's not arriving as an empty vessel waiting to be filled. She's arriving as a whole person who is now considering whether you are worth integrating into a life she's actually become quite good at living. She's not looking for completion. She might actually be looking for addition. And there's a massive difference between those two things. The man who operates from the completion model, who frames himself, consciously or unconsciously, as the answer to her loneliness, misses this entirely. He positions himself as the solution to a problem she's already largely solved, and she can feel that framing. It makes her feel seen as a deficit rather than a person. The man who operates from the addition model, who meets her wholeness with his own, who is interested in her rather than in the role of rescuing her, that man speaks to something entirely different in her. He's not there to fix anything. He's there because he's genuinely drawn to who she is. Full stop. And that distinction, that subtle shift in relational positioning, changes the entire emotional trajectory of a connection. Here's what else is happening during this identity rebuild that most people don't consider. She has likely developed a very refined sense of her own standards, not in a defensive or bitter sense, in a clarified sense. When you've spent time with only yourself, you stop tolerating things you might have tolerated before. You become quieter, more discerning. Your bullshit detector gets recalibrated to a higher sensitivity. This is why some men who pursue women in this phase of life report that she seems closed off, or too guarded, or not ready. What they're actually encountering is selectivity. And selectivity isn't a wall, it's a filter. The men who get through that filter are not the ones who persist loudest. They're the ones who demonstrate, not claim, that they are genuinely worth the investment of reopening. How do you demonstrate that? Presence, groundedness, emotional honesty without emotional dumping, the ability to hold your own interiority without needing her to manage it for you, interest that feels like curiosity, not like craving. And underneath all of that, the capacity to be genuinely comfortable with who she's become, without needing to change it, without feeling threatened by it, without quietly competing with the independence she's built. A woman who has rebuilt herself through solitude has often become more than who she was inside the last relationship. She knows that, even if she doesn't say it. The man who can see that and celebrate it rather than feel diminished by it becomes something she didn't know she was looking for. He becomes interesting. And interesting, in this context, is the most powerful form of attractive there is. Let me pull these three threads together for a moment before we talk about what this actually looks like in practice. The first trigger told us that her nervous system has down-regulated its sensitivity to intimacy, and that the right response is steady, patient warmth rather than escalating intensity. The second trigger told us that touch deprivation creates hypervigilance, not openness, and that her sensitivity to physical presence is heightened, not dulled, which means attuned presence matters more than confident escalation. The third trigger, and I think the most important, told us that she's not who she was at the beginning of that period of solitude. She's built an identity in that space, a full one. And any man who relates to her as a person waiting to be rescued has fundamentally misread the room. Taken together, these three triggers point to a single, unified principle. The framework that actually works here is not strategy. It's maturity. The kind of maturity that allows you to be genuinely interested in a person without needing them to immediately respond to your interest. The kind that allows you to be physically warm and present without making your presence feel like pressure. The kind that allows you to meet her wholeness without competing with it or shrinking in front of it. This is what I mean when I say understanding changes behavior. You don't have to learn scripts. You don't have to optimize your approach. You just have to understand what's actually true about her experience and let that understanding reshape the quality of your presence. So, what does this actually look like? Not theoretically, in real moments. Let's say you're spending time with a woman who you know has been out of intimate partnership for a couple of years. Things are warm between you. There's clearly something there. But she pulls back sometimes. Not dramatically, just slightly. A message she doesn't immediately respond to. An evening where she seems more internal, less expansive. A conversation where she's present but not fully open. The instinctive read for most men is, she's uncertain about me. I need to do something to close the gap. But the more accurate read, informed by what we just discussed, is, her nervous system is managing the pace of reconnection. Her system is processing. The downregulation of intimacy doesn't reverse overnight, and her hypervigilance is active, scanning to confirm whether you're safe. The right move? Continue being present, consistent, warm without being intense, not chasing the gap, not performing stability, actually being stable. One of the most powerful things you can do in a moment like this is hold your own emotional state without projecting it onto her. Don't make her temporary withdrawal mean something about you. Don't bring it up in a way that centers your uncertainty. Just remain yourself. That continuity, the fact that you don't spike or spiral when she's more internal, that is the data her nervous system is collecting. And over time, that data builds a picture of safety that no amount of clever conversation could manufacture. Another practical example. You're in a conversation that's getting emotionally real. She's sharing something honest about her time alone, maybe something vulnerable about what she missed or what she learned about herself. The instinct for a lot of men is to respond with empathy that's almost too eager, to rush into the emotional space and fill it with warmth and validation because it feels like the right thing to do. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the more powerful response is quieter than that. A nod. A pause. That makes a lot of sense. Not filling her experience with your response to it, just making room for it to exist. Letting her know that the space she's created here is safe. Not because you've immediately analyzed and affirmed it, but because you've held it without flinching. That quality of witness, unhurried, non reactive, genuinely attentive, is what she's been missing. And when she finds it, something in her relaxes in a way that logic can't manufacture. And here's one more, probably the subtlest: compliments. Most compliments directed at women are about how they appear, which is fine, appreciation is good. But after a period of intimate isolation, a woman has become very intimate with her own inner life, her thoughts, her values, her perspective, the way she sees things. When you compliment that, not just how she looks, but how she thinks, the way a specific observation she made was genuinely interesting to you, the quiet way she approaches something that you noticed and found compelling, you're speaking to the identity she built in solitude. You're saying, I see the person you became, not just the person you are to look at. That's not a technique, that's just paying attention. But the men who pay that kind of attention, they become unforgettable to women who have spent time learning to value what's real. If you found this kind of framing useful, where we go beneath the surface of attraction and talk about what's actually happening emotionally and psychologically, I've put together something that extends this work further. It's a free guide. I'm calling it the Emotional Intelligence Map for Connection. It goes deeper into the nervous system dynamics we touched on today, particularly around what emotional safety actually looks like in practice, how to build the kind of presence that creates trust without pressure, and how to recognize the subtle signals of a woman who's considering opening again versus one who's genuinely closed. No tactics, no scripts, no formulas. Just a clearer map of the psychological territory most people are navigating blind. The link is in the description. You can grab it, read it at your own pace, and take what's useful. That's all I'll say about it. Let me leave you with something to carry with you. Attraction, real attraction, the kind that deepens over time rather than burning out, doesn't follow the rules most people think it does. It doesn't follow persistence. It doesn't follow technique. It doesn't follow intensity. It follows understanding. When you understand what someone is actually experiencing, not what you assume they're experiencing, not what would be convenient for your narrative about them, but what's actually true about their inner world, you stop relating to them as a target or a puzzle. You start relating to them as a person. And people can feel that shift immediately. A woman who has been through a long period without intimacy carries something in her that most people will misread. They'll see guardedness and think coldness. They'll see her independence and feel threatened. They'll sense her discernment and interpret it as rejection. But you, having watched this, you know something different now. You know that the guardedness is a nervous system that recalibrated for survival. You know that the hypervigilance around touch is a sensitivity that's been heightened, not hardened. And you know that the independence and self-sufficiency she's built, that's not a wall between you and her. That's who she became. And the person she became is worth being genuinely curious about. That curiosity, unhurried, unchoreographed, real, is what desire follows. Every time. Not because it's a strategy, because it's the only thing that's actually true. If this landed for you, if there was a moment in here where something clicked or shifted, I'd love to hear what it was. Drop it in the comments, not for engagement metrics, but because these conversations, when they're real, push the thinking further for everyone here. And if you're new here, welcome. This is what we do. We slow down. We go deeper. And we try to understand people better than the average conversation allows. Subscribe if that sounds like something worth staying for. I'll see you in the next one.